Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are taking a pretty dramatic shortcut into the most fascinating and, well, frankly, the most unreliable guide we have.
Our own minds.
Exactly. We're diving deep into how the brain actually constructs reality, not just, passively records it. And why these meticulously built cognitive illusions, they often become our unshakable personal truth, even when they completely clash with the facts.
Well, it's the mind's primary function. It's really essential. You should think of your brain not as some perfect reporter, but more like a relentless editor.
An editor, I like that.
Yeah, it's brilliant at building a complete, rich world. I mean, if you're in a casual conversation, you might only process maybe 60% of the actual sound.
Oh, because people slur their words or talk too fast.
Exactly. But your brain, it just instantly fills in that missing 40%. It fabricates the meaning that, allows for comprehension.
And that's usually a good thing. It helps us function.
Usually it's adaptive, yeah.
Yeah.
But our mission today is to understand what happens when the reality the brain constructs, whether it's from emotional trauma, social pressure, or an outright neurological failure, is just systematically false.
But feels utterly authentic.
Literally.
And that tension, that space between what feels true and what is true, that's really what defines our sense of self. We are going to unpack the neurological and psychological mechanisms of denial, of internal self-deception, tracing that line from everyday coping strategies all the way up to these extreme brain-driven fabrications that just defy all logic.
Right. Let's get into it.
So we have to start where it all begins, really. The psychological drive for internal consistency, our personality, our social lives, they're all built on these internal narratives.
Absolutely. The foundational coping mechanisms we develop really early in life, often they're just designed to secure attention or safety or just emotional survival.
Yeah.
They become permanently wired in.
You mean like the kid who was never given unconditional affection?
Right. So they learn to be overly charming or maybe aggressively competitive, or they seek status just to feel visible.
So a defense mechanism, a scar, essentially becomes the foundation of their adult identity.
Precisely. These survival traits become so ingrained that the adult has, and I'm quoting here, no memory of them not being there.
Wow.
They're not defense mechanisms anymore. They become your second nature. The constructed coping self just replaces the authentic self.
And the brain defends this new identity.
Fiercely. Because at some point, that identity keeps you safe.
It's a bit chilling to think that what we define as our core personality might just be scar tissue from past wounding.
It often is. And you see this even in how people process emotion.
Yeah.
If you had a difficult childhood that resulted in, say, internalized anger,
Okay.
the brain often solidifies this by turning that anger inward. We call it self-hatred. And it's a fundamental, devastating shift in perception that the brain actively builds into an internal story, a false memory of who you are.
And this internal self-deception, it gets reinforced by the outside world, right?
Massively. You see it with groupthink, which is basically a shared cognitive illusion.
Right, when the group cares more about getting along than being right.
Exactly. It creates these reverberating circuits of self-reinforcing, misleading thoughts.
Which means the individual's false reality gets a huge social stamp of approval. The group actually punishes different perspectives because they threaten that shared narrative.
Whether it's true or not.
Yeah, true or not. But what's fascinating is that you can kind of flip this, right? A form of conscious self-deception can actually be used for success.
You're talking about the success circuit.
Yeah, telling yourself, I did it or I can do it, even if it feels completely fake at first.
Persistence eventually etches that pathway so deeply that it feels just as real as any failure circuit etched by past accidents.
Which just highlights that the brain isn't really seeking truth so much as it is.
Consistency. It wants the story to hold together.
So that brings us back to the philosophical core of all this. If the brain is inherently selective, it's filtering things out, it's prioritizing emotional safety.
Accepting convenient social narratives.
Right. At what point does that necessary selectivity cross the line and become a destructive distortion?
Look, consciousness has to be selective. It's partial. We survive by choosing what to focus on. But if you systematically choose only the partial truths,
the ones that justify your coping mechanisms?
or the information that just confirms your group's beliefs, that deliberate selection inevitably ends in a huge distortion of the truth of some larger whole. The brain values maintaining the story of you more than it values objective external data.
Okay, so if the brain is that obsessed with internal coherence, let's look at what happens when actual physical damage forces it to invent reality on a massive scale.
This is where it gets really wild.
Yeah, this is where we move from subtle self-deception to, like, full-blown cognitive illusion.
But the central theme is the same. The brain must maintain an internal model of the world. And when sensory or emotional data drastically fails to match that model,
It doesn't admit it's wrong.
it will prefer inventing an impossible explanation over ever admitting an error in its own wiring.
And the ultimate example of this has to be Capgras syndrome, the imposter delusion.
Oh, absolutely.
For anyone listening, can you just break down the mechanical error behind this? This bizarre belief that your spouse or parent has been replaced by an identical robot.
It's a disconnect in the neural pathways. Damage, usually in the right hemisphere, severs the connection between the brain's face recognition center and the amygdala.
The emotion center.
Right, the part that processes emotion and familiarity.
Yeah.
So the patient can visually identify their loved one perfectly. They can say, that is my mother's face.
Okay, so the recognition is there.
The recognition is there,
Yeah.
but critically, they receive no familiar warm glow, no emotional resonance. That profound sense of familiarity is just gone.
So the cognitive data, I recognize this face, is in direct conflict with the emotional data. I feel nothing.
Exactly. And the brain would rather believe in impossible fiction over a neurological failure. The logical left hemisphere, our little narrative generator, basically says,
Okay, let's figure this out.
if I recognize her visually, but she doesn't feel like my mother, the only possible explanation is that she is a highly convincing duplicate,
An imposter.
an imposter.
Yeah.
It's terrifying because the patient is forced to live in a reality where the people they love most are fakes, all because an emotional circuit broke.
That is horrifying. And we see a similar thing, but with sensory fabrication in Charles Bonnet syndrome.
Yes, where patients who are partially or completely blind start to experience these extremely vivid hallucinations.
And these aren't like drug-induced visions or anything.
Not at all. They're silent, unbidden, and often very whimsical. You hear about clowns, circus animals, tiny figures, geometric patterns.
And the patient knows they're not real.
Yes, that's what's so important. They know the images aren't real, yet they appear with super vivid colors, and sometimes seem, quote, more real than real objects.
So the visual cortex is just starved of input and starts making its own reality to fill the void.
That's the idea. It's generating its own content.
But maybe the most forceful example of the brain defending its constructed self-image is anosognosia, the denial of paralysis.
Oh, this one is just stunning. This is where the patient's constructed sense of capability just completely trumps all physical evidence.
So this happens after damage to the right hemisphere, usually.
Typically, yes, which affects motor control on the left side of the body. The left hemisphere, which is specialized for language and, narrative continuity, it just refuses to integrate the data of the paralysis.
It's the consistency checker.
Exactly. It fills the gap with these elaborate, often nonsensical explanations we call confabulations. It's literally creating a false memory of what just happened.
The brain is just so hardwired to defend the illusion of being capable, we have to share that mock injection anecdote.
It's the perfect illustration of this absurdity. A physician injected a patient's functional right arm with a local anesthetic.
Okay, so it goes numb.
Right, it's temporarily immobile. And the patient easily acknowledged, yep, my arm is numb, can't move it.
Simple enough.
Then the doctor injected the paralyzed left arm with the same anesthetic and asked her to move it. She insisted it was moving.
Even though it was already paralyzed and now anesthetized.
Correct. And when the doctor pointed out the total lack of movement, the patient, desperately trying to reconcile objective truth with her internal model, just declared.
What did she say?
She said, well, I don't know, doctor. I guess it's mind over matter. I've always believed that.
Wow. It just manufactured a whole belief system on the spot to justify the impossible.
Just to keep the story consistent.
Okay, so we've seen the brain create illusions. How do we dismantle one? Let's talk about the phantom limb.
The purest form of constructed reality. Pain and sensation in an arm or leg that literally does not exist.
It's a persistent, painful error in the brain's body map.
The somatosensory map, yeah. And the mirror box technique offers this stunning demonstration of how visual input can override these deeply ingrained motor signals.
So the patient sees their healthy limb reflected where the phantom used to be.
Exactly. And the visual reality, the limb is there and it's moving, is in direct conflict with the motor reality, which is, I'm sending signals to a limb that's gone.
And that conflict is just too massive. The brain can't confabulate its way out of that one.
It can't. The beleaguered brain is forced to resolve the contradiction by essentially admitting defeat. It just says, to hell with it, there is no arm.
And the phantom construction collapses.
It collapses. And critically, the associated phantom pain, that illusory pain in the non-existent limb, it disappears entirely.
Because you can't have pain in a limb that the brain now accepts is gone.
The pain vanishes because the brain has resolved the sensory map. It's proof that the pain was generated entirely by the brain's erroneous internal model.
So powerful.
So we've explored how the mind constructs realities to cope with, emotional absence and physical damage.
Right.
Now let's look at the inverse problem. What happens when the brain fails to filter an abstract? When memory is so concrete, it actually impedes thought.
This shows why the brain needs to actively destroy some data to build a useful reality.
It has to forget.
And this brings us to the famous case of S, the Russian mnemonist, a man who, for all intents and purposes, couldn't forget.
While we all struggle with memory gaps, with false reconstructions,
S suffered from a crippling excess of data.
his ability to retain information for decades was staggering. He did it through this complex synesthetic imagery and Ido technique.
So a sound would evoke a color, a texture.
A smell, yeah. These graphic associations created such rich additional information that his recall was nearly perfect.
But wait, so instead of creating clarity, that perfect recall actually prevented him from accessing abstract thought. He couldn't make a useful conceptual reality.
Exactly. S struggled intensely with abstract concepts and complex texts because he could only understand what he could visualize concretely.
So if he read a dense passage,
Those details didn't coalesce into an overarching meaning. Instead, each individual detail spawned new, competing graphic images. His mind just turned into a virtual chaos.
he was overwhelmed by the raw data. It's the ultimate failure of filtering.
It is. And it raises a powerful insight. Abstraction requires the ability to generalize, to forget the specific details in favor of the larger concept.
And S couldn't forget.
He had difficulty forgetting the images he no longer needed. If words were read too quickly, his specific graphic images would coalesce into a kind of chaos or noise through which he had difficulty discerning anything.
So his reality was too real, in a way.
His reliance on the concrete made him seem dull, awkward, somewhat absent-minded to other people, because his perception of reality just failed to align with practical, abstract circumstances. Our ability to forget is just as crucial as our ability to fill in the blanks.
So if our minds are constantly creating these narratives, from childhood coping scars to kept grass delusions, how do we as individuals break out of these self-deception loops and reconnect with a more, a more stable, authentic self?
The process is one of rigorous self-examination. The goal is simple but incredibly difficult. Reawaken the authentic self by making conscious what was unconscious.
So every mistaken belief, every internal story built to protect an old wound,
Your blind spots,
they have to be dragged into the foreground of the mind.
so you can observe them.
It's about observation, isn't it? If we can just observe the belief, then we can start to question it. We can cleanse away these mistaken beliefs only by shining the light of consciousness on them.
Precisely. We need to actively question the motives behind our own consistency loops. Why do I prioritize this specific defense? Does this fear truly align with objective reality? Or is it just a projection of a past injury?
That requires a lot of intellectual honesty.
And sustained focus. And crucially, we have to change the way we perceive our own conscious capacity. So many of us feel that our consciousness is small, limited, constantly overwhelmed.
Yeah, by worry, by little things.
And that feeling is itself a cognitive illusion. You feel limited because you are focusing solely on small and limited objects. Petty grievances, status worries, past hurts.
So you have to shift your focus.
If you deliberately pull back and explore consciousness itself, the space of awareness, rather than just the things in it, you can experience consciousness as tremendously expansive. The authentic self is found in that expanded focus, not in the narrow narratives the self-deception loops keep feeding you.
The stability of our life, then, ultimately, it relies on the brain being a good editor, ruthlessly cutting away the unnecessary details and being honest about the narratives it constructs.
The self we experience is, at the end of the day, a phenomenal construct.
Wait.
It's exquisitely susceptible to our internal stories, our emotional input, and those neurological demands for consistency.
And we've seen illusions created by psychological wounds, by neurological damage, and even by the failure to forget. We focus today on how the individual brain creates a reality for its own survival. But if we connect this construction process to the bigger picture, a larger, more crucial tension starts to emerge.
Right. We noted that if a purely partial, selective truth is systematically embraced, it becomes a destructive distortion of the larger whole.
So this raises a final and I think a deeply provocative question for you to consider. The ultimate unit of survival is not just the individual or even the family line.
No.
If an organism or an entire aggregate like a society focuses solely on its own constructed reality for its own survival, it risks destroying the external environment it depends on.
Thereby destroying itself.
Right. So what happens when our necessary personal cognitive illusions clash with the objective, non-negotiable reality of the larger world we all have to share?